Hello, evil minions. It is I, your mean and evil overlord. Okay, hello and good morning. It is Wednesday, April 8th, 2020, and today will be part 2 of our imperialism lesson. We started with part 1 on Monday. If you haven't watched that, go do that first before you watch this one. If you've got that one, you should be about halfway done with that notes page that was posted in the Google Classroom along with this video and PowerPoint. And make sure you have that ready to go. We're going to finish that up today, so have that ready. Couple things, just classroom business first before we get on with that. We had on Tuesday some Zoom sessions for each of the 2 Google Classrooms that we have, and they went pretty well. Had a number of people message me afterwards and saying, "Oh, I didn't make it. Sorry about that." It's okay. Those are optional meetings. It's just a way for me to touch base with you guys live, to answer any questions you might have about any of the assignments that are up there, or to talk, or to just touch base with me for a few minutes. If you can't make it, that's fine. Not everybody can. If you can, you want to show up, please do. We will be on for about 30 minutes per session, and we can chat. And that's kind of what those Zoom meetings are for, just to touch base, answer questions. So if you can't make it, that's great. One of the things we did discuss, though, at the Zoom session yesterday was that most of you are having issues with the PowerPoint that I posted. Google is not converting that over very well, and I suspect it has something to do. The PowerPoint that I posted was not a regular PowerPoint. I saved it as a presentation mode, which just has all the slides that you click, but it doesn't have any of that stuff on the side where you can edit and do all that kind of stuff. And so Google Classroom, or the Google Slides, may not have known how to handle that. So I'm not sure how I'm going to deal with that in the future. I don't want you guys kind of tinkering around with the mechanics of it. I just want you to be able to view it. So I'll have to figure out what to do about that. But in the meantime, you can follow along on that PowerPoint on this video. I'll go over it slide by slide. I'll explain so you can finish your sheet then. And we'll worry about next week's presentation next week. So anyway, sit back. This will be part 2 of our lesson. In part 1, we talked about imperialism in Africa. And today, we are going to continue our discussion on imperialism, but we're going to switch to a different continent. We're going to move from the continent of Africa to the continent of Asia. So let's go ahead and look at that. Oh, I'm blinking out, but I'll still be here. So imperialism in Asia. Clearly, the Western world, Europe and the United States, were not going to be just satisfied with Africa. They wanted more land, more customers, more territory to lay claim to, and they pretty much considered Asia to be in the same boat as Africa, technologically inferior, and just an enormous amount of people and land that could become customers that they could go into and take valuable resources for themselves. And Asia was just seen as yet more territory to capture, just like Africa, since that had seemed to be going so well. So we will start off talking about the Dutch East India Company. Now, the Dutch East India Company was kind of one of the biggest private businesses around. It was started around 1602, so before even there was a permanent colony in the United States, the Dutch East India Company was doing business, and it ended up being one of the biggest companies in the world at that time. In fact, they were just kind of a small government unto themselves. And they had received a charter to go into India and some of the islands there in the South Pacific and set up trade routes and open up those markets. The Dutch government granted it a monopoly on the spice trade, and it really was the world's first public company with stocks to be sold, and they just made a fortune opening up those Asian markets. They established a center in Jakarta, Indonesia, trading center, and they put these trading ports all across the region. They were kind of like trading ports, military bases, that type of thing. And they went in and created this presence in Asia and India. And really, the company was so big, it was almost like a government itself. They had their own private troops. They could send troops in to fight wars. They could imprison and execute convicts. They could negotiate treaties, things like that. And establishing colonies was one of the things that they did as a byproduct of going into that area. So the Dutch East India Company kind of started moving in, but it did not end there. Ultimately, we saw a map of Africa. This will be kind of the map of Asia, and you can see how, once again, a lot of these European countries and the United States started acquiring territory in that area. You can see Great Britain took over the entire country of India, as well as a few others surrounding it. If you've ever wondered why people from India speak English so well, it's because they were under British rule for a long time. You've got over here French Indochina, which ends up being Vietnam. The Dutch East India Company controlled a lot of this area down here in Borneo and in that area. And of course, then the United States, after the Spanish-American War, acquired the Philippines, and we'll get to that next week in greater detail. But as you can see here, the Western nations kind of carved up Asia just like they did Africa. One of the big exceptions was China. That never really fell under anyone's rule. It was a huge country with a large population, but they still had issues with these Western nations, and we'll go into that in a minute. Japan also, while never directly occupied, was forced to do business with Western nations, and we'll get into that as well. So let's look at imperialism in Asia. One of the big things that occurred, and I told you a moment ago that China never really was taken over by a Western country, but there were still a lot of issues. And ultimately, China ended up fighting what was called the Opium Wars against Great Britain in the mid-1800s. And much like the Boer Wars in Africa, I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting into this because it's kind of complicated, but essentially what it comes down to, and we've talked about this all year, power and money. Great Britain wanted to make money off of China, open up those markets, but China was really reluctant to do that. So what Britain did was they started harvesting opium from that was grown in India. Opium is a drug, and essentially Great Britain became a drug dealer, shipping tons and tons and tons of opium into China, getting the Chinese people addicted in an attempt to make just a huge amount of money from opium. Well, the Chinese government during this time, the Qing dynasty, they were not okay with that. They said, "You're not going to do this. You are destroying our people." and they started fighting. And it's a big topic. I'm not going to spend much more time on it, but that was a huge deal. The Opium Wars during this time. But one of the big side effects of it was that it did weaken the Qing dynasty, and ultimately China was forced to open up its markets to trade with Great Britain and the rest of the world, whether they wanted to or not. But they couldn't really stand up on an extended period of time against the superior technology that they were facing. And ultimately, they did open up their markets, which is what Great Britain was looking for to begin with. So, also, while Great Britain was trying to open up China for trade, the United States wanted to open up Japan. Now, what happened here was pretty simple. What the United States did, President Millard Fillmore in 1852 hired Commodore Matthew Perry, or ordered Commodore Matthew Perry, who was a U.S. naval officer, to go to Japan and encourage them to open up their ports. And what Perry did essentially was steam a bunch of modern Navy ships into Tokyo Bay and force the Japanese to deal with them. And this is where the term came out of this, called gunboat diplomacy, because what Perry did essentially was sail into Tokyo Bay, turn his guns toward the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, and then in talking with the Japanese officials said, hey, we want to be your friend, we want to trade with you. And who's we? Oh, that would be me and my gun over here to the left and my gun over here to the right, these big cannons. We want to be friends with you. We're going to be friends, right? And Japan reluctantly agreed to open up its borders. And Japan had practiced for hundreds of years an isolation policy that they just did not want to deal with outsiders. There was a policy of national seclusion called Sakoku, and then they did not want to deal with other people. But when all these modern Navy warships from the United States steam into the harbor, they didn't really have a choice. An interesting trivia piece, if you look at that picture of Commodore Matthew Perry, and no, all my friends, fans out there, not that Matthew Perry, this Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry, Commodore Perry, was described to the artist of this painting. This artist never saw him directly. And interesting trivia was he was told that Matthew Perry, Commodore Perry, had blue eyes. Well, this Japanese artist had no idea what that meant. And you can see that the part of the eyes here that is normally white is what was colored in blue, because the artist just really didn't know what blue eyes actually look like. So interesting piece of trivia there. So U.S. Opened up by the use of basically its force and coercion, forced Japan to deal with them. Now, the U.S. didn't stop with Japan. This is Queen, and I'm not going to get it right. If you know what it is, please do not harass me about it. I'm going to try to get this right. Liliuokalani. He was queen in Hawaii in the late 1800s. United States lays claim to Hawaii in much the same way they did Japan. They rolled their ships in and they make their presence known in Hawaii, and they annex Hawaii in 1898. Let's see, anything else I want to add? No, that's pretty much it. We could actually talk a lot more about this, but I'm trying to keep this video short. But the Hawaiian people were not necessarily in favor of being annexed by the United States, but again, did not have much choice, and the United States kind of used Hawaii as a base of operations for the Spanish-American War that crops up right around this time, and we will learn about next week. So we've mentioned India a little bit. I mentioned how Great Britain had taken over India. It was another company. This one was the British East India Company. Again, another huge company. They were commissioned by the British government they were chartered. They were allowed to come into India. And India, as I had mentioned in, I think it was Monday's video, became the jewel in the crown for Great Britain, simply because of the enormous wealth that India brought Great Britain. They would use Indian soldiers called sepoys to do a lot of their fighting for them. They paid these soldiers pretty well to do that. They were kind of a private mercenary force, and they did a lot of the grunt work, or the violent work for Great Britain there, and they will actually come into play a little later. But Great Britain put its stamp on India pretty heavily for a long time. In fact, they controlled India. Let's go back. They controlled India all the way until 1947, after World War II, before they finally pulled out of India and returned India to Indian rule. All right. So again, like in Africa, a lot of this didn't go unchallenged. There was conflict in Asia. Not all of it included Asia. Russia, the Crimean War, was in the western part of Asia, on the other side of India. The Russians and the Ottomans in Turkey fought for control of the Red Sea in that area during this time. You had the Sepoy Rebellion in India in 1857 over treatment by the British. That turned out to be a pretty bloody conflict as well. There's a lot of resentment by the British style of social reforms, harsh land taxes, things like that, and the Sepoys rebelled against the British. You also had the Boxer Rebellion in China over foreign influence. Now, it's called the Boxer Rebellion because of the it was a group of Chinese called the Righteous and Harmonious Fists was involved in fighting Great Britain, and they knew martial arts. Well, nobody in Great Britain or the Western world was really familiar with the martial arts, so they just called them boxers, and that that was a huge conflict that involved a lot of different foreign powers. The results of the imperialism, one of the big things, the sun never sets on the British Empire. You can see all these areas, these territories in red, were controlled by Great Britain. And the expression, the sun never sets on the British Empire, is because no matter where you were in the world during daytime, when the sun is shining, it was shining on British territory somewhere. So the sun never set on the British Empire. nationalism grows in some of these conquered regions. The resentment against these imperialistic powers is growing. That will lead to a lot of conflict later on. You also get rivalries develop among Europeans over who has what, who has conquered what territory, who is getting wealth from what territory. And all of these things really start leading into a lot of tension among these different countries. And you end up with a series of alliances and treaties that ultimately leads to World War I, and we will be getting to that as well in a few weeks. But it all starts here. It all starts the Spanish-American War that we'll talk about next week, World War I after that. All of this is set up by imperialism. All of this is set up by imperialism. All of this is set up by all of these more powerful Western nations. And when I say Western nations, I mean Western Europe and the United States, because they want more territory and they are willing to fight to get it. And it all leads to a lot of bloodshed. So that will conclude our lesson on imperialism this week. You can see we're going to close, and if we were in the room, this would probably be your reflection. If you look at that cartoon, explain the cartoonist's view of England as an imperialist power. Well, you can see England here, and it's not an octopus. There's more than 8 there, I think. Yeah, there's a lot more than 8. And you can see these hands, these British hands, have influence over a lot of different countries around the world. And it's basically speaking to the greed of Great Britain during this time. So that will conclude the lesson on imperialism. Let me come back in here and just say I'm going to sign off now. We are a little over 20 minutes, so a little over what I wanted. I wanted about 20 minutes. But you know me, I ramble. So I will get this posted, and it is late, actually very early Wednesday morning. It's currently 2:21 a.m. Wednesday morning. I'm going to get this rendered and uploaded. I'll schedule it to appear at some point Wednesday morning. So please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you guys Thursday in our Zoom session. If you have any questions, you can ask me then, or if you want to leave a comment on the Google Classroom or on this YouTube page about any of this. I am sorry about the PowerPoint issues we're having on the Google Classroom, but we will get that taken care of soon, hopefully for the next assignments. Y'all take care. I miss you already, and peace. Oh, like and subscribe. Hit that bell notification. Bye. If anyone has a hidden immunity idol and would like to play it, now would be the time to do so.